Okay, welcome back to Wednesday and Ask Uncle Lee slot. And as always, this is where you can ask about any questions you got about the occult, witchcraft, demonology, all that stuff. And let's get into the questions. Join me over on Patreon, where you will find all of my books, services, and courses in the shop, blog posts, and the various tiers which you can explore. You can get magical training in the Temple of the Horned Serpent First Degree, and joining as a free member gets you started with that, or explore the Magical Journal and the Egregore Project. Hope to see you there. Okay, today's questions. One from David 02178. One from Smiley Face 3956, and one from Kiawata 1. All right, so starting with David's. Hi, Uncle Lee. Hope you don't mind me popping another question here. Absolutely not. Carry on. As long as I've got questions, I can keep the show going. In books such as the Charmer's Psalter and Holy Daimon, these talk about the use of psalms in either witchcraft or vocalizing joy to achieve ecstasies. I have heard other crafters use psalms in their craft. My question is, who are we aiming the psalm at when these have passages such as O Lord or O Almighty God? We are obviously not aiming at the Christian God, but if we aim them at the old one or something higher, how do we shake off the connotation and historical symbolism that goes with their use to make them effective in traditional witchcraft? Okay, so I think the first thing to consider here is the possible history. I don't think we can actually prove this, but if you consider it from the idea of how the our forefathers, our ancestors, the people that kind of had this Christian movement coming through the country would have approached this. It's a bit like these new people come from another land and they bring with them their God and their pantheon, because it was Catholicism, so they had the saints and the angels, the Mother Mary and all of this stuff, Mary Magdalene, etc., etc. So they came with their own pantheon. Now you're sitting there and you have the horn god and all of these entities and beings that help you with your festivals, your harvests, and help you raise your animals, your sheep and your cows and all of this stuff. Okay, um, so you've got your own little pantheon of deities, and then all of a sudden these other people come into your land, and they start coming in, and they've got their own pantheon. Okay, which is God and everything else, and they start saying that their God is more powerful, and you kind of go, well, I don't really know about that. I don't know your God. But what I'll do is I'll incorporate it into my own practice and see if there's any basis to it. Let me pray to your deities, to your gods, and let me see if I get any answers. And they may have, and they may have got answers. They may have, done some magic in the name of Jesus or the name of God, and they would have gotten a response because they are aiming at a particular energy, a particular vibrational state. And I work with the energy model more than the spirit model myself, so it's kind of like how I approach the whole thing. So they kind of did this magic. They did it in the name of whoever it was, and they got a response. They got the results, same as if they did it with their own deities. And therefore, they may have incorporated that into their own magic. At some point, and in some areas, it may have ended up being war and persecution, and the not so nice parts of the whole thing, and therefore there was a rejection of these gods and goddesses, which is what we tend to do now, is reject Christian faith because we've seen how terrible it can be. How many people were killed in the name of the Christian God. Entire nations destroyed, genocide, people displaced. It was awful. It was terrible. So we've seen that. We've also seen the trauma in our own lives that that faith can actually cause, and therefore we want to reject that. We don't want to bring that into our own practices, which is you said shake off the connotation and historical symbolism that goes with their use to make them effective in traditional witchcraft. But the when these charms and chants were written with this in mind, actually written with the asking Jesus or God or Mary to actually aid in the magic, in the healing, or whatever the actual charm was for, it's because they actually incorporated that pantheon into their own pantheon. There's a lot of history around what is it? Jesus' aunt. I believe the story is surrounds Mary actually bringing Jesus as a child into England and into Glastonbury. So if you get into the history of Glastonbury, there's a lot of mention of Mary and Jesus, um, and there's also a belief that the Fae are actually the fallen angels. So there's a lot of tie over, especially in traditional witchcraft. There's a lot of tie over with the Christianity because it got incorporated. A lot of people will talk about the invasion and the killing and the war and everything else, but it was a syncretism. It did end up being an incorporation, a melding of these two traditions and two faiths. So you have to bear that in mind. So if you can view it from that perspective of these were people who saw these others come in with their pantheon and they decided to syncretize or meld or bring that pantheon and mix it with their own pantheon to try and enhance, to get along with them. You know, these became their neighbors, so they had to somehow get along with them, and therefore this syncretism actually aided that in that process. And that's why these charms and such were written for this. And obviously, it became a bit more. Christianity became a bit more dominant over the ages, which is why some of the books are very much focused around the Christian pantheon itself. But that's kind of like, if you can kind of view it from that perspective, instead of trying to reject Christianity completely, then you can start to see the syncretism and the melding and the changing and the things that had to take place in order for people to actually um, keep going to survive most of the time. So, but if you are going to use these charms, you can use them with the idea that you are connecting with a particular vibrational energy, which resonates in some fashion that you want. It may be called God, and it may be referring to the Christian God, but is it? As I said last week in relation to your other question, the Christian God is an egregore that we speak about nowadays, but 1,000 years ago, probably a different entity completely. So the entity that their ancestors were seeing as being part of this pantheon of these neighbors came into their land was very, very different to what we consider it to be now. Um, I would say anyway. So there's that aspect, or you can take the charm or the psalm. Psalms are very powerful, but if we're talking about a charm from the old lands, then you can obviously you can actually take that and just change the name, or mentally, the Almighty God. Who is your God? Who is the entity that you connect with, that you resonate with, and you're just directing it to that. It's just words, but the intention is different. Oh, the Psalms. I was actually going to talk about the Psalms just a little bit. So the Psalms are actually they're very powerful. I mean, I know a majority of them come from a Christian background, but these were actually written in Egypt, um, as far as I remember. Some of the Psalms actually didn't make it into the Book of Psalms, but they were actually Egyptian magic. A lot of them. So again, it's we consider it to be this modern. I think that's the problem. We kind of mentally think it's this modern Christian thing, but this goes back thousands of years, and it's the relationship, the thing, how things have changed since then is vast. So we've got to kind of try and disconnect from this modern Christian idea sometimes, and consider what things were like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and where these things came from, and the intention behind them, and what was happening at the time. I mean, if you go back 3,000 years before Christianity, before Jesus was born, back to the Hebrews and the Israelites, that was a very different time, very different entity, a very different God. This wasn't a monotheistic religion. This was a polytheistic religion. But over 4,000 years, things change a lot. So try and view things from different perspectives rather than just the idea that this is a modern thing, modern Christian thing, because it's not. There's lots of layers and nuances that go into this. All right, so going on to the next question, which is from Smileyface3956. Hi, I got a question. I made some pacts and realized that I lost some stuff in a blink of an eye. 2 crosses and a paper with exam answers. Could you please tell me what that means and if there is a way to get these things back? Quite honestly, I don't have a clue. I kept this answer in here just because I think this boils down to you need to go and ask the spirit what happened. You made a pact with the spirit, and something happened. I can't tell you what happened, and I know a lot of people will go to people like me and say, "This happened. Why did it happen? Why did the spirit do this?" I don't know, because I don't have the same relationship you do with that spirit. It was the pact that you made, not me. So in a lot of cases, you're going to have to go back to the spirit yourself and ask. Now, I will say this: you haven't said this, so I'm not relating this to you anymore. This goes a bit beyond the actual question that you've asked. But if a pact is made with these people on Etsy, you can't go back and ask the spirit, because you don't have that communication. Okay, not speaking about you, general now, just bear that in mind. If somebody has made a pact with a spirit from these people on Etsy, those people do not have the foundational work. They don't have the means or the ability to actually go and sit down with the spirit that they made a pact with, which is why a lot of people do this and they kind of go, well, nothing happened, nothing's working, I can't speak to the spirit, because you don't know how to. And that's why we do the foundational work. Do the foundational work, learn how to test the spirits, learn how to speak with the spirits. Once you can do that, then you can make a pact with the spirit yourself. Don't go to other people asking them to do it and paying them fortunes to do it, because that's just a bad thing. All right, so coming back to, just wanted to mention that, sorry. Just coming back to your question, yeah, I can't really answer that for you because it's got nothing to do with me. It's a very intimate bond that was created between you and another spirit, and I can't get involved in that. And yeah, so that's it. You're going to have to go ask the spirit themselves. All right. Sorry about that. All right, so on to Kiowata 1's question. It's a bit of a long one. Highly, I know you just did a Demon of the Week video on Satan, but I was hoping to entice you to expand on that. Firstly, being a modern demonologist and comfortable with the idea that demons are probably the various different metaphysical elemental essence or energies intrinsic to the natural universe, perhaps panpsychic is the term, explains my foundational concept. What I have some difficulty with is the alternate idea to Judeo-Christian mythology and theology of Satan, and where it is supposed to have originated from. Okay, so let's start there. That originated from groups of people considering anything which is not the Christian God being the evil aspect, the things that we don't want in our lives, but anything which is also opposed to the Christian God as being the adversary. Everything. It doesn't matter. There's thousands, millions of things, ideas, spirits, gods, etc., 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 that make up this thing but they just brought them all together. But this thing that is the adversary to their faith. And therefore it was just all brought together and labeled Satan. Okay, that's it. And over the ages, that became a figure. It got horns and hooves and a pointed tail, and it was red because it comes from hell. Another invention. Hell is a complete invention of the Christian people. And, well, obviously it has roots probably in Zoroastrianism, but anyway, we're not going there at this particular time. All right, so it's Satan. The origin of the Christian Satan is the pulling together of everything which is opposed to the Christian faith, to the Christian God, and calling that and making that an entity which was Satan. On the other side, everything which is good and honors the Christian faith and their God became God. Okay, so God, Satan, just simplified. Everything is just simplified, and creating this duality, good and evil. Satan, God, and all of these things which just divide one thing from another. So that's really, there's no starting point, I don't think, of where this all began. It evolved over ages. And then you said in one of S. Connolly's prayer books, there is something called the Daemonic Creed. I believe in Satan, the ether of all the sick as creator of the universe and the spirit that binds the all together. So that is from a specific tradition, which is the tradition that Connolly was initiated into, which was very much a generational family-based tradition until Connolly actually published a book. Nobody knew about it. But this is very specific to that tradition, and therefore Satan is considered to be the element of quintessence, of spirit, of ether, of all of the elements brought together, binds the all together. So that is a very specific view of what Satan is, the all, the element of ether. Okay, so again, that's a very specific thing. We had the bringing together and binding of all things which are opposed to the Christian God, being labeled or termed or called and personified as Satan and anthropomorphized. Then we have the Satan, which is a different tradition, as being the element of quintessence or spiritual ether or all. Okay, so we've got two. Where did that originate? I don't know. Not part of the family tradition. It could date back hundreds of years. I don't know. That's something that is very specific and kept secret by S. Connolly because of honor to the actual initiatory process and the faith of the oaths that are taken. All right. So we may never know. Now, you said, now I understand that in many occult circles, Satan represents the fifth element, so on and so forth. That would be that particular tradition. What I seem to be lacking is an origin story or creation myth which isn't tied into the many Christian or anti-Christian myths, and perhaps that's the beauty of it, that we get enough information to form our own beliefs about who, what, where, when, and why Satan is. I get that. However, it is frustrating when engaging with those who persist in relying on biblical verses, myths, and of course, pop culture references to be able to respond with a cohesive, cogent alternative rather than trying to point out the obvious flaws and gaping holes in those references. I'm currently researching Mesopotamian history, culture, and mythology, though I am skeptical as to how much truly new occult-related information I will find there. Would dearly love to hear your thoughts, as always, on this topic. All right, so we've spoken about two. The Christian Satan, the generational demonology Satan, which has then spilled over into a lot of other people, like me, following that particular thing. My own interpretation is completely different again. I am the Satan, the adversary to the society which is trying to form me and mold me into it in a certain way. Okay, so I become the Satan in that regard. So that's my view. That's very different to anybody else's. And then we have the anti-Christian, which is very much your Satanist, a lot of the left-hand pathers who are taking this opposite, again, divided approach to the whole thing of Satan versus God. It's just switched, turned on its side type of thing. That's another one, all right. But that is very similar to what the Christian God, the Christian Satan itself. It's just that they have taken it as this evil entity, and they've decided it's not the evil entity; it's actual the good one, and God, the Christian God, is the evil side. So that's just a switch around, all right. So you got that one. But what you really need to do here is understand what the person is talking about. And this is why we have conversations, why we talk, why we try to understand terminology that people are using, because we all use terminology in different ways. And they may mean the same thing, but there's slight nuances to how people are actually referring to or understanding things, and therefore referring to things. But that's why we communicate with them, find out exactly what they're talking about, and then you can kind of speak on the same level. If I'm speaking to a Christian about Satan, then I know they're talking about this thing which is opposed to their own faith. If I'm speaking to a demonologist who is talking about Satan or Satan being this the fifth element, the quintessence, the spirit, I know what they're talking about. All right, so I can have the conversation then changes. It's no good going into Mesopotamian history in this regard, though. What you probably, I think, what you're aiming at here is this Satan or Satan, which is the adversary, which is the divide, the good and evil aspect. Therefore, you want to go into something like Zoroastrianism, which I spoke about this month on the Path series. That's kind of where this divide started with Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, or Ahriman. That's where the good and the evil split and became these two separate forces that created this duality. Before that, everything was polytheistic. Mesopotamian history, you'll find, and Sumerian is very much polytheistic. And yes, they spoke about these evil spirits. How that was translated back in Sumerian times, I'm not entirely sure. It's possible that we have taken those words and we have translated them as being this evil. We now have this modern idea of what evil is, and therefore we're relating that in that fashion. But it may not have been evil in the same way that we are referring to it. If you go and look into older Kabbalistic tradition, evil was considered to be illnesses, dispositions, things that affected us in a negative way. It wasn't any external spirit that was considered to be evil. So there's all these different interpretations you have to take into consideration, and this is why it becomes very difficult. You're probably not going to find an origin point, especially if you're going back to Mesopotamia, Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian, and all that stuff. But what might help you here is to take the word doctor. We have a word in the English language which is doctor, and that refers to a specific type of person, a person who has studied for a variety of years to do a particular thing, which is heal. Okay, but this is a word, it's doctor. Now take that and think thousands, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I don't know when the word actually came up originally, but go back to the origin of the word Satan within that language. Remember, we're talking about language, we're not talking about entities here. When we go back to the idea of Satan, that's a language thing, it's not an entity thing. There wasn't an entity called Satan. It was a word that meant something, and when we translate that into English, it means adversary. So this referred to multiple different entities. Any entity that was adverse to, or stopped you, blocked you, stopped you from progressing, anything which was adverse to your path, to your progress, to you, or whatever it was, or to whoever it was. And in some regards, this referred to angels who blocked the progress of somebody. They became an adversary. They were adverse. They were blocking your progress. Angel, not some kind of evil spirit that Christians think Satan is. An angel. And that became a Satan because it was an adversary. But that's a language thing. It's not an entity thing. Okay? So if we take the word doctor, doctor refers to multitudes of different people. It's a title, it's a job. But we also have different types of doctors. We've got doctors of science, we've got doctors of psychology and philosophy, and we've got general practitioners, and we've got specialists. We've got all these different types of doctors. And within all of those different fields, we've got thousands and thousands of people who are doctors. And that's a word thing. It's not an entity thing again. So you have to think of this in the same way. Satan is a word in a language. Doctor is a word in a language. And as there are many, many, many different doctors, there are many, many, many different Satan. And, that's how we need to view it. There's no origin point. If we go back and have a look at where our doctors came from, we could go back to Hippocrates and beyond that, further back into Greek philosophy and, into early BC centuries. But even before that, going back to caveman, there would have been somebody who would have discovered that this particular herb, if you crush it and you mix it with water or you mix it with milk or something, and you smear it on somebody's burn, it cools the burn down. These are doctors. So this is going back to the beginning of time, right? But in that case, they weren't called doctors because doctor is an English word that originated somewhere along the line. But it may have been evolved from Latin, which evolved from Greek, which evolved from, from Greek or whatever language it evolved from. Greek probably evolved from I'm not a linguist myself, Babylonian or Sumerian or something like that, etc., 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 going back into the far reaches of time. Same with Satan or Satan, which originated from this word Satan. Which then originated from somewhere else, etc., 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 etc. So that's kind of how we have to view it. I know you're looking for this origin point of this entity. There isn't one. Really as simple as that. Okay. All right. I think that's it for this week, actually. So thank you for watching again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers for now. Bye-bye.